son igual que tu primo, tu mamá. Imagínate encerrado sin poder la luz mirar.
This is the Amor Migrante podcast, Love for the Migrant, a project of Estrella del Paso, the largest provider of free immigration legal services in West Texas and southern New Mexico. This podcast is coming to you from El Paso, Texas, hosted by Sandra Ramirez and Cristian Trujillo. Please subscribe to the Amor Migrante podcast to be alerted about new episodes and visit www.estrelladelpaso.org to support our work on the southern border. A fiery social media post by Elon Musk has ignited the first major immigration feud of 2025. The Tesla and X owner took to his social media platform recently to express support for the H-1B visa program, a specialized visa for foreign workers. That post firing up anti-immigrant supporters who say the program takes jobs from American workers. President Trump weighing in defending the H-1B visa program, telling the New York Post, quote, "I have always been in favor of the visas. I've been a believer in H-1B. I have used it many times. It's a great program." This despite President Trump limiting access to H-1B visas during his first term. Congress limits the number of H-1B visas to 65,000 per year, and an additional 20,000 are available to foreign professionals with a master's or doctorate degree. Just last month, USCIS announced that it had already reached the regular cap and the master's degree cap for fiscal year 2025, which runs from October 1st of 2024 through September 30th of this year. The U.S. tech industry relies heavily on the H-1B visa program to hire foreign skilled workers to run its companies. While some are calling for the program to be eliminated, others say it should be expanded and reformed.
Welcome to another episode of the Amor Migrante podcast. Today we are talking about something that you may have heard a lot about in the past week and a half or so, the H-1B visa.
Yes, so basically today we're going to be talking about what is the H-1B visa. We have Imelda, our legal director, here to answer those questions, answer some of those hot takes and hot information has been coming off the press lately. Right, so welcome Ms. Imelda Maynard to the podcast.
Thank you.
Start with the first question. Imelda, let's start with the basics. So what's an H-1B visa and who qualifies for it?
Sure. So the H-1B visa is a visa for high-skilled workers, right? It's a way for employers to bring in workers that they need in specialty jobs. So it usually requires that a worker have a bachelor's degree or higher in specific industries. Oddly enough, there's one for models of distinguished accords. So like models have their own kind of H-1B visa.
Yeah, special pretty privilege.
Yeah, that is a special pretty privilege, exactly.
Nice.
And you have to have a job offer in that specialty occupation. And then obviously the employer is the sponsor. So these are not the types of visas that are migrant-led in the sense that anyone, like if I want to work in the U.S., I can just apply for it, right? Your employer's the one who does all the work, the legwork.
So they have to request you to be able to qualify for that visa?
Correct.
And then once they do the request, you automatically come to the U.S. or it's still a waiting process?
Oh, no. I think it would be, I think employers everywhere would love it if it were that easy.
Right.
No, it's a whole process. So.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Enjoying this podcast? Just a quick reminder, in 2023, Estrella del Paso helped over 7,000 clients with nearly all of the cases being free. This early giving season, every bit of support helps us to continue this essential work. Don't forget to show your support by donating at estrelladelpaso.org. And that's all. Back to the podcast.
There has to, well, first, right, from the migrant side of things, from the immigrant side of things, you would have to be hired by right? You'd have to have a job offer and everything. And then that employer has to be willing to undergo a series of hoops to petition for you.
Okay.
So the first part, an employer has to get what's known as a labor, trying to remember the actual name. I don't remember if it's a labor certification or what it's called exactly, but essentially they have to go to the Department of Labor first. And they have to certify to the Department of Labor that, hey, I'm going to pay this worker the prevailing wage in the industry. So you can't bring in someone just because like, oh, I want to pay them less, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
I want to pay this person, I want cheaper labor. You can't do that. You have to show that you're going to pay them either the prevailing wage for
that industry,
or that you're going to pay them what someone in a similar comparable position at that same company makes.
Okay.
Whatever's the higher of the two. So again, you can't cheap out and be like, well,
Because
I
that's-
pay them,
yeah.
I pay my workers less. So you can't do that. So
Okay,
the
perfect.
regulations actually require pay be at the very minimum the prevailing wage for that industry, right?
Got
And
it.
so that's protection for the job labor market,
worker,
right?
yeah.
So that you don't depress wages.
Right.
Once they do that, once they get their labor certification, and they have to let other workers know, like, hey, we're requesting foreign workers, so that workers that are already here can protest if they need to before the Department of Labor, right? That kind of thing. So the way the petitioning process is made for these visas, it is very protectionist of the U.S. labor market.
Okay.
So unlike a lot of like the myths that you hear, right,
Right.
that like, oh my God, this is bad for the U.S. labor market, the laws are written in such a way as to where it tries to make sure that employers aren't trying to get the upper hand.
Right.
Good.
Right.
And that's something that I read online recently, because I know Elon Musk brought it back to being a really, really hot topic in the immigration community. Is that a lot of people were commenting like, hey, you know what? Yeah, they want to bring them because they are going to get paid less, and companies can exploit them and take advantage of them. But which, by what we're hearing, is not true. Right.
Right. I mean, at least not in terms of wages.
Right.
All right. There's other ways you can exploit folks, sure, but at least not in terms of wages. The other thing that's required, so once they get the labor certification from the Department of Labor, and I will say even before then, I think in 2020, USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, instituted a lottery, right? Because as Sandra had mentioned in the intro, there is a cap to how many of these types of visas, depending on which H-1B you're applying for, are given every year. So employers have to essentially register, and if all of the spots have been taken for that year, they enter a lottery to see if, like, can you even begin the process to petition for someone. So some of this may just be luck also.
Right.
Once they get their saying, yes, you can go ahead and apply, you've got a number, then they do the labor certification process, and then after their labor certification, right, the Department of Labor says you're good, then they apply before U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They tender their petition for their worker. If the worker's in the United States, then the worker can start working as soon as the start date was on their petition.
Okay.
If they're abroad, then there's a whole nother process that worker has to go through, right? Go through the consulate, get their visa, and then come in and then start working. The visa is only good for initially a period of 3 years.
3 years.
It can be extended for another 3 years for a total of 6 years. There's exceptions to that, but essentially that's how it works.
That's
So,
maximum 6 years. Okay.
and so once the worker has 6 years on an H-1B, unless they meet certain very specific exceptions, they will have to leave the country, be out of the country for at least a year before they qualify for another H-1B filing.
Man.
I thought that, and so I saw that extensions are fairly common, that there are more extensions that are issued. But I thought you could just keep doing that.
No.
Oh.
The extensions are limited to folks that within their H-1B process, their employer was willing to apply for their permanent residency, which is a completely different process that an employer has to undertake. If they're in the process of permanent residency, because that process takes a lot longer, then they're able to extend while they're waiting for their permanent residency to go through. But if they're not, then at 6 years, you're cut off and you got to go.
You gotta go back. Dang. And how common is that? Like the employer's request for a permanent residency for employees?
I don't know, to be quite honest.
Because that's like, I wonder how good of an employee you must be for the employer.
Valuable, right?
Yeah, exactly, for the employer to actually put that effort for you to become a lawful resident.
I mean, I would hope it's fairly common, right?
Yeah.
Because, from an employment standpoint, you invest a lot in each employee, right? In terms of like resources, but also just knowledge, right? Institutional knowledge of your organization, your work and everything like that. And you get to know this person. So, I mean, I would hope
it's common, right?
it's common, but I really couldn't speak to that.
Man.
When we talk, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
When we talk about those qualifications, that's something that came up with the whole Elon Musk conversation, right? Where he's like, the United States, we're just not prioritizing the things that we need to prioritize to find these qualified workers. But then there's also, you weigh that versus the exploitation of these workers, right? So these are two, I mean, how do you address those?
That's a really hard conversation, to be honest, because I mean, The critics, to some extent, are correct. This program does lead a little towards exploitation in terms of, if you're a U.S. worker, right, and all you have to lose is your wage, and you can easily find another job, right? You're not going to lose your livelihood. You're not going to lose your house or anything like that. This is your country. You're probably going to be more willing to speak up when things aren't going the way they're supposed to, right? You're going to probably be much more willing to like address injustices that are happening versus where your entire livelihood, right, and your ability to stay in a country that you really want to be in is on the line always, right? Because even when you institute lawsuits, right, and even if you're in the right, it can take years sometimes, right, for litigation to go through, right, to get vindication for what were exploitive practices. And not everyone has the privilege to wait those out, right? The pay and that kind of thing. So, you know, as a foreign worker, you may be more subjected, to exploitation, to basically keeping your mouth shut and not saying like, hey, this isn't right. Like, you're not supposed to do this to me. And like, hey, you know, you said in my labor certification that you were going to pay me X amount, but you're actually paying me less.
Yeah.
Right. You may be more inclined to stay quiet, or you may be more inclined not to say like things like, hey, I'm only supposed to be working 40 hours a week. You got me working 80. Right. So yes, it does lead to some level of exploitation just because your employer is very much in control of your ability to remain in the United States, right? If they terminate you, that's it. You have to leave the United. You have 60 days to leave the United States.
Oh, so it's not like you can apply to another company, like
you can, but again, that's its own process,
So
and
they will have to
and they
petition.
have to petition for you, and then it has to be approved before you can start working for them, right? And so. After you've been terminated, there is a 60-day grace period. So you have 60 days, right, basically to either find a new job or leave the country.
Oh, wow.
Right? And by that point, you as the immigrant are the person that has to pay for, right, the new filing fees out of pocket, right? You probably have to go find your own lawyer to help you with that process. So it can be quite costly.
Man, no wonder why like a lot of people decide just other state, other country, because it's living like, I guess, in stress every single day.
Yeah.
Because it could be that you get fired or the company goes in bankruptcy and they close down, and then now you have 60 days to still keep up your way of living. If not, you have to go back to the country that you were coming from. Man, that's crazy.
And you don't want to be a difficult employee, especially if you're counting on that extension or you're counting on that LPR status. Like, you're not going to want to be difficult. You're going to want to be accommodating in every way you can.
Right. I mean, quite honestly, in this economy, we all want to be accommodating. I think we're all like, I'm thankful I got a job. So,
Exactly.
you know, but think about it. It's even more precarious if you're like, this is the country I want to call home.
Yeah.
And the only way forward is through my employer. So yeah, you probably are going to be a lot more vulnerable to exploitation.
Definitely.
And I read that the H-1B, well, the basic reasoning for that visa is for the U.S. to stay competitive within the market and bring, like people that are highly skilled from other places to here, and make the people that are or U.S. citizen or residents to become highly skilled as well, because now it's going to be like an internal competition, right? But I've heard that people, like, I know experts are trying to close down or shut down that visa. In your opinion, do you think it should be shut down, or do you think it's a visa that does benefit the country when it comes to skill?
No, I think it's a visa that definitely benefits the country that comes to skill, right? Because one way you look at it or another, we live in a global economy, right? So whether the folks are working here on behalf of the country or elsewhere, you're still competing against them, right? It's just that you don't want to be so protectionist, right? That then we don't have those workers, right? And then we fall behind. I will say, I read somewhere the cost to petition for each worker is quite high, right? So at a minimum, I think I wrote it down here. At a minimum, an employer is looking at least $1,200 per employee to petition for them. It can go as high as $7,000, right, per employee. Dang. But I saw that at one point, the fees collected from that were used then to help the U.S. labor market. Like there was I think it was called WIRED, and I don't remember what the acronym stand for, but it was essentially a program used to help U.S. workers obtain skills in the labor market, right?
Okay, that's good.
So again, it's a program that essentially helps
The
everyone
internal-
rise together,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then I see the benefits now.
Yep.
And that's something that I haven't heard before. And I think that's
Yeah.
important for people to know and not to go based off on what you see on social media and the comments people don't know. Because I didn't know that. I mean, the fees collected, they go back straight back to our
Into, like, the
market.
workforce,
Exactly, to our
yeah.
workforce to enhance the U.S. citizen
Economy and-
workers or citizens or residents, workers in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to keep in mind. It's a benefit that, yes, you're benefiting because you're bringing someone skill from other places, but you're also getting benefits by investing back in your market in that sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this isn't a new program. This isn't a new
Right.
visa. This has been around for decades. It's never been controversial. Like it's
Up until
just
now.
up until
Yeah,
now.
up until now.
Up
Yes.
until now, everybody wants to have an opinion. It's like, let's figure out a new way to attack immigration in one of the most beneficial ways that
Exactly. Because and this is because I've heard before, right? And based off on what people says, is that some of the best, I guess, medical or tech or engineering schools are outside of the US. And this is a myth that might be not true, right? But I've heard before that one of the best medical schools was in Cuba. Like one of the best doctors were from Cuba, and things like that. That you want to have the best for your country, right? So might as well reach out to other countries that are doing something better than you, to get help. And bring someone that is highly skilled from I don't know, Turkey or somewhere, and helps you teach those younger generations. And because you're people seeing what they do, they're gonna be learning from that, and I think that's a benefit for our country at the end of the day.
Yeah, I really think that the conversation shouldn't be around, well, we shouldn't bring in foreign workers because they're taking, U.S. jobs. It should be like, well, why aren't there enough U.S. workers, right, to fill these positions? Like, where is it that we're falling short as a country that we're not preparing enough people to fill these positions?
Exactly.
And education is a huge thing, right? Like our government has very much divested in education. Like think about how much it costs if you want to be a doctor, how much you have to invest.
crippling debt.
Crippling debt,
absolutely.
right? Whereas that's not necessary in a lot of other countries, right? Which is why they have more doctors.
Exactly.
So yeah, I really do think, I would hope the conversation starts to change from, we don't want foreigners to well, wait a second, why don't we have skilled workers?
Right.
What is it we need to change so that we can prepare those folks that are born and live here to be able to fill those positions?
Absolutely. And while I work at the financial institutions, you'll be surprised how many credit reports I saw where doctors had student loans or collections because of student loans for people, and it's because Imelda said, it's expensive to do it here, and not everyone can afford to go to school 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, get a master's, get a PhD, and not everyone is interested in becoming a doctor now. And nowadays, I think more of the younger generations are invested. Exactly, they want to become influencers, they want to do something else, right? But not everyone is interested in becoming a doctor. The same as not everyone wants to be a police officer, not everyone wants to be a lawyer or things like that. And there's places outside of the US that people, they do look forward to becoming doctors or to help the society in a certain way. And that's where I think this visa makes a difference.
Yeah, and the thing is, we need that work, right? We need that labor. We need doctors.
Absolutely.
We need, we need high skilled welders and carpenters, upholsterers, engineers, that kind of thing, right? Yes, I'm sure everyone wants to be an influencer. Awesome. But someone's got to build the bridges and the roads and keep us all healthy.
Exactly.
And so, I think that's the biggest thing is in order to have those high skilled workers here, right? The cost of a college education is just astronomical.
Yes.
And you go into a lot of debt. And again, just a lot of folks can't afford to do that, right? It's a privilege to even be able to take on that amount of debt.
Absolutely.
And so, I think the conversation really needs to shift to one of education and being how can we make education more affordable, that you can get these licensures and that kind of thing without necessarily digging yourself into a hole that's going to take another 20 years to get out of.
Exactly. Yeah.
On that topic, though, we're talking about what we can do as a country, right? If we have an issue with this visa, how do we remedy that, right? How do we address the need for it? But as long as it exists, there have been calls for that to be reformed, overhauled. What would that look like? What would improving the H-1B visa look like?
Okay, my answer is going to be super simplistic because my answer to like honestly reforming all of immigration should be, I think the process should look like what a lot of people think it looks like, which is essentially you have an application, you submit a background check, you pass the background check, you maybe pay the applicable fees, and if you pass the background check, we feel like you're a good person, then you come in and boom.
You start working.
You start working.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's my ideal immigration solution. And I think that's how a lot of people think the system works, but it's not.
Right,
And it begs the question, well, why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Exactly. And I think that's what, like Imelda said, like a lot of people think, and that's why many people gets closer to the border and then try to do it once they see that, oh man, I have someone to sponsor me at this, or they have to pay this much money to this, like $7,000 for an employer. It could be like a difference between getting new equipment or hiring someone who's gonna help you. So I think, I agree with like make it simple, and I think that will help as well in the fact that it will be easier for the U.S. to process documentation, because everyone now is gonna be like, okay, there's a way to do it. Let me just do it the right way, and let me do this, and let me process, and it's gonna go ahead and start, instead of people like try doing other ways.
Right. And when we talk about you can apply this to probably most of the topics that we talk about when it comes to immigration. Let's talk about the contributions. Like if these are like highly skilled workers, they're not taking on minimum wage jobs. You know what I mean? Like they're taking on high paying jobs. They're paying taxes on these jobs. They're renting, they're paying into their communities. They're, you know what I mean? Like all of these different things. They're buying cars, whatever the case may be, right? They're spending a lot of money here.
Yes, and I believe Elon Musk actually came through an H-1B visa, if I'm not mistaken.
I think I did see that,
and I mean, whether we like this guy or not, right? He made a change when it comes to technology. He's made an impact when it comes to those things. Yeah. And he came through this process, right? We allow someone to be this powerful when it comes to technology through that visa. I mean, how many other lives are out there that we could reach out that could change the U.S. for good?
I mean, a lot of titans of industry, right, are immigrants, right? Steve Jobs is another good example. I don't think he was an H-1B, but
he was an immigrant.
He was an immigrant,
that's
right?
So true.
And so it leads a lot of innovation, right? It fuels in not only fuels like new industries, new economies, but like further jobs for U.S. workers.
Yeah. And like Sandra mentioned too, helps the country grow when it comes to the economy, right? Because they get pay taxes, they have to go ahead and buy groceries, they have to put gas, they have to pay a rent. Right. So it goes back to the same U.S. market. It's not like they get all the money and then they send it away from the U.S. It stays here. It's just, it's like a revolving door. It goes back to us in a sense.
I mean, even our incoming First Lady, Melania Trump, was an H-1B visa holder.
Oh,
she had one of those model visas.
Oh, the model visa.
Yeah, no, I'm going to spread that visa off.
The more you know, look at that.
That's crazy.
I'm just going to make a list of people you didn't know have an H-1B visa.
And I believe soccer players and like athletes, they go through that visa as well. So it's not only right to be here to take out U.S. citizens or lawful residents job, is just to make the country better, right? Whether you see sports, anything. Recognizing
the most talented people in whatever field that is from wherever country that is. Like that just makes sense to me.
If it's going to make our country better, if it's going to help us in any sense, welcome, right? Welcome to everyone that's going to be here.
Temporarily welcome for 6 years.
Right, for 6 years. Unless your company closes and then you have 60 days to change everything. Man, that's not true.
But I think it's important to always point out the contributions, because I think folks forget about that, right? It's like, well, these are also taxpayers. They're paying into the system. They're paying into Social Security and Medicare. And not only that, but like tax bases, right? Like here in Texas, we don't have an income tax, but you get taxed everywhere else. Right? So when you're going to the grocery store and spending money, that all goes back into the community.
Yes. Right. I'm going to make a point to research how much money goes back from H-1B visa holders to our community. And I'll post it on our social media to see how much money.
We love numbers.
I think it's easier to read for me.
Well, that was really great. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on or talked about that you think we should address about the H-1B?
None that I can think of.
Me neither.
There we go.
This was by no means an in-depth conversation about how it works.
Yes.
This is just the basics. We wanted to have a better understanding. We learned a ton.
Oh,
Me and
yes.
Christian learned a ton
For
about
sure.
how it works. So that's what was really helpful. For the record, we don't do H-1B visas here at Estrella del Paso. So we can't help you with that process. But I hope this was informative.
Right, but we like to combat misinformation.
That's right.
And all those myths that you could see that could, generate division in a
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
So even though we don't process H-1B visas here, we do process good information, right information, and we like to push those good parts of what we have and what we do, right? So I think that should be all for this episode.
Yeah.
Once again, we want to thank Imelda for being with us today on this new podcast of Amor, Migrante, and we'll see you guys the next time. Bye-bye.
Murió Ana y José Luis, buscando la carretera, murió Carla y Ramón.